What happens when a nightmare that has slept for centuries decides to wake up? In the remote Amazon basin, along the liquid silver of a winding river, a village breathes in the twilight. Smoke from cooking fires rises into the humid air. Children's laughter echoes near wooden huts. And for a moment, the scene is one of timeless peace. But the peace is a fragile skin stretched over a deep, ancestral fear. As shadows deepen, an uneasy silence settles over the forest. Villagers glance nervously toward the dense, impenetrable wall of the jungle, as if expecting something unnatural to emerge. This is not just a village. It is a stage for something extraordinary, a place where the ordinary is about to fracture under an impossible intrusion. The night here does not bring rest. It brings a dreadful anticipation, a sense that reality itself is about to be unsettled. A young woman stands barefoot in her yard, a basket of fruit in her hand, her sharp eyes scanning the tree line. Her breathing is fast and uneven. Thick mist weaves through the foliage, obscuring movement, making the familiar landscape feel alien and hostile. The sound of rustling leaves grows louder, though no wind stirs. She drops a piece of fruit, a small offering to a fear that is rising in her chest. The air feels claustrophobic, the insects buzzing louder than usual. Suddenly, the sky darkens with unnatural speed, bathing her in an eerie, pale green light, her expression frozen between curiosity and terror. She is being watched by unseen eyes, a feeling that screams louder than any noise. Deeper in the jungle, a group of men moves cautiously along the paths, their old hunting rifles held tight, beads of sweat tracing down their foreheads. The air is thick with fog, and massive tree roots crawl across the ground like serpents. The camera shakes slightly, amplifying their urgency, their whispered breaths loud in the oppressive air. Suddenly, they freeze. The jungle has gone completely silent. No birds, no frogs, no insects. In that crushing silence, illuminated by shafts of moonlight cutting through the canopy, they realize they are not the hunters tonight. They are the prey. Back in the village, a teenage girl's trembling hand holds a dim flashlight, its quivering beam dancing across the dark wooden wall of her hut, casting distorted, unnatural shadows. Her knuckles are pale as she grips the light, her lips muttering quiet prayers. Then comes the sound, a slow, deliberate scraping against the outside boards, like claws dragging across stone. The silence between each scrape is suffocating. A figure suddenly towers outside the hut, impossibly tall, clad in strange black armor that glimmers faintly in the moonlight. Its helmet is elongated, and from within its visor, two glowing yellow eyes pierce the darkness. The jungle itself seems to vibrate with an unnatural hum. The line between folklore and lived horror dissolves in a single, terrifying moment. Chaos erupts. A man's face, captured in close-up, is a mask of primal fear, his mouth agape in a silent scream. Reflected in his wide pupils is the image of a hovering dark figure with glowing lights at its feet. Another man fires his shotgun into the night, the sparks bursting against the armored figure, the pellets bouncing off with dull, metallic pings. The being does not flinch. It tilts its head with an unnerving slowness, as if mocking the effort. It hovers 6 feet above the ground on a disc-shaped platform, its eyes glowing with unnatural brilliance as dust and leaves spiral upward around it, defying gravity. This is not a myth. It is an overwhelming presence, a master of the night. The attack is swift and brutal. A young girl collapses to the ground, a precise cut on her neck bleeding into the dirt, her consciousness fading as screams explode around her. This is not a random assault. It is a harvest. The attackers vanish as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind a village shattered by despair, confusion, and haunting uncertainty. In the aftermath, as the survivors gather around a crackling fire, an elder with deep wrinkles and sharp eyes begins to speak, his hands trembling as he recounts an ancient tale. His voice, breaking with urgency, whispers an ancient name, a word that carries the weight of centuries of terror: Pishtaco. Hunters of flesh who walk in the dark. The story he tells is not new. It is a nightmare, centuries old, that has come alive again in their time, a recurring horror binding past and present. The villagers listen, their faces marked by exhaustion and terror, a fragile unity forged in shared dread, knowing that nothing can protect them from what waits just beyond the treeline. A teenage boy, his eyes filled with defiance, grips a rusted machete and steps toward the jungle's edge, a symbol of humanity's instinct to fight back, even when hope is scarce. A mother kneels beside her wounded daughter, her love a desperate, primal instinct in the face of helplessness. This is the curse of the Amazon, a story written not in ink, but in blood and fear, a mystery that has just begun to unfold. Pishtaco hangs in the humid air of the devastated village, a name heavier than the night itself. It is not a new fear. It is a memory, a wound in the soul of a people, passed down through generations not as folklore, but as a warning. To understand the armored figures that hunt in the 21st century jungle, we must travel back 5 centuries, to the rugged, windswept peaks of the Andes, where this legend was first written in blood and terror. The camera soars above the snow-capped peaks, where indigenous villagers walk solemnly along ancient stone paths, their bodies bent under the weight of history, a land soaked with centuries of conquest and resistance. The year is 1532. Spanish conquistadors march through the jagged cliffs, their steel armor glinting under a harsh, unforgiving sun, their banners snapping in the wind. They are a force of terrifying, otherworldly power, their muskets spitting fire, their horses like armored beasts. To the indigenous peoples of the Andes, they are not just men, they are a cataclysm. They come for gold, for land, but they take something more. In the chaos of conquest, a new and specific horror is born. The Spanish, far from home and short on supplies, begin harvesting human fat from the bodies of the slain natives. The act is brutally pragmatic. The fat is used to treat their wounds, to grease their weapons, to waterproof their armor. But to the native people, it is an act of ultimate desecration. It is not just murder. It is consumption, the reduction of a human being into a mere resource. In a horrific, methodical ritual, soldiers carve with clinical precision, their eyes detached, turning human flesh into currency. In hushed, terrified whispers, the story spreads. The Spanish are not men, but monsters, pale-skinned hunters who stalk the night to steal the very essence of life. They are given a name: Pishtaco, the White Butcher, or Skin Peeler. A legend is forged in the crucible of trauma, a way to give a name to an evil too grotesque to comprehend. We see it etched in the faces of grieving elders, who whisper curses against the invaders, their grief and fury birthing a myth that will outlive the Spanish Empire itself. For centuries, the story is passed down. Around flickering fires, under the vast, starry skies of the Andes, children listen with wide eyes as their elders recount the tales of the Pishtaco. The story becomes a shield, a cultural memory that binds the community together in shared dread and resilience. But is it just a story? In the modern era, archaeologists and historians have begun to unearth the grim truth. In dusty excavation sites, they find human remains bearing the marks of a terrible, methodical violence, skulls with clean incisions, bones with cuts that match the descriptions in the legends. In the cold, sterile archives of museums, scholars pore over colonial diaries, their fingers tracing the ornate, faded script of Spanish soldiers who calmly documented the practice of taking fat from the bodies of natives, as if it were routine. The evidence is irrefutable. The Pishtaco was not a phantom born of superstition. It was a historical reality, a name given to a very real and very human monstrosity. That monstrosity, it turns out, never truly died. The practice of harvesting human essence for profit simply changed its form. The film pivots to the grim reality of the modern world. In bustling city morgues and on sterile forensic tables, investigators uncover a global black market for human fat and organs. News headlines flash across a glowing screen. Police uncover gangs selling human fat on black market. The legend has resurfaced, not as a myth, but as a headline, an echo of the same grotesque commerce that haunted the Andes centuries ago. In this new, horrifying context, the attacks in the Amazon take on a chilling significance. The armored figures, the precise cuts, the sense of a harvest, it all aligns. The Pishtaco has returned, not as a ghost of the past, but armed with the technology of the future. The question is no longer whether the legend is real, but whether the modern attackers are a continuation of that same brutal history, a dark chapter that never truly ended. The ghost of the Pishtaco, once a whisper from the 16th century, now wore modern armor. Back in the besieged villages of the Amazon, the abstract horror of history had become a brutal, recurring present. The survivors, their faces hollowed by sleepless nights, began to speak. In sparse interview rooms, under the glare of a single spotlight, their testimony provided a chillingly consistent portrait of the attackers. A young woman, the scar on her neck a permanent testament to the encounter, described them not as spirits, but as soldiers. They moved with a silent, mechanical precision, clad in seamless black armor that reflected the torchlight with an unnatural sheen. They wore elongated helmets that hid their faces, but from within, a pair of malevolent yellow eyes glowed with their own internal light. They carried no visible firearms, yet they wielded weapons that cut with beams of light and fired projectiles of pure energy. Most terrifying of all, they did not walk. They hovered silently, 6 feet above the ground, gliding through the dense jungle on disc-shaped platforms that hummed with a low, vibrational energy. As investigators and journalists probed deeper, a crucial, confounding detail emerged. The attackers, while silent in their movements, were not always silent in their speech. An elder, his face a mask of grim certainty, recounted hearing their voices, not the guttural cries of a mythical beast, but human words, spoken in a mixture of Spanish and another, unrecognizable foreign tongue. This was not an alien invasion in the classic sense. It was something more complex, and perhaps more sinister. The blurry cell phone footage and shaky eyewitness videos, once dismissed as hoaxes, were now analyzed by forensic experts in darkened labs. The evidence, when stabilized and enhanced, was undeniable. The figures were real. Their technology, however, was not supposed to be. In a sterile military briefing room, a skeptical analyst pulls up a slideshow. On one side of the screen is a still from the village footage, a tall, black-armored figure. On the other side, a series of classified prototypes from U.S. military projects. The resemblance is uncanny. The silent hover technology mirrors secret developments in electromagnetic propulsion. The armor's resilience to gunfire is consistent with advanced, classified composite materials. The energy weapons bear a striking resemblance to next-generation laser and plasma weaponry being tested in deep black projects. The narrative was no longer just about a monster in the jungle. It was about advanced military hardware being deployed against a civilian population. The question was no longer if the attacks were real, but where this technology came from. A new, combined team of independent investigators and villagers, armed with their own modern gear, decided to confront the mystery head-on. They patrolled the jungle, their night vision goggles turning the familiar forest into a luminous, eerie green landscape. They planted sensors that picked up strange energy spikes and recorded the unnatural hum that preceded an attack. The hunters had decided to hunt the monster. The confrontation came on a moonless night. The jungle, which had been alive with the thrum of insects, fell deathly silent. On their thermal scopes, the investigators saw them. Not 1 or 2, but 5 tall, glowing figures moving through the trees with perfect, synchronized precision. They encircled the village, not attacking, but observing, their glowing platforms forming a perfect ring of light in the darkness. It was a demonstration of absolute control, a tactical display that felt chillingly professional. When the attack finally came, it was a maelstrom of light and sound. The villagers' shotguns were useless, the pellets sparking harmlessly against the impenetrable armor. The intruders responded with beams of energy that scorched the earth and splintered trees, their power precise and overwhelming. In the chaos, an investigator, his hands shaking but his resolve firm, captured it all on camera. The glowing eyes, the hovering discs, the energy beams, irrefutable proof of a technology that was not supposed to exist. And then, as quickly as they came, they were gone, ascending silently into the night sky, leaving behind a village scarred by a battle it could never hope to win. In the aftermath, the investigators analyzed the evidence. The ground was scorched and emitted low levels of radiation. The footage was clear and undeniable. This was not a myth. It was a military-grade operation. The narrative had reached a terrifying turning point. The legend of the Pishtaco, once a ghost story, had become a cover for something far more tangible. The final, chilling question of this chapter was no longer who the attackers were, but who had sent them. Was this a rogue corporation testing its weapons? A secret military unit operating outside the law? Or was this something else entirely? A force with access to technology so advanced it could operate with impunity in the darkest corners of the world, hidden behind the convenient mask of folklore? The jungle had given up some of its secrets, but in doing so, had revealed a conspiracy far larger and more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The technology was undeniable, but the implications were even more terrifying. If the armored figures that haunted the Amazon were not spirits and not extraterrestrials, then they were human. And that conclusion opened the door to a far darker series of questions. Who were they? What was their motive? And who was protecting them? The investigation turned from the jungle floor to the sprawling, neon-lit arteries of the modern world, searching for a pattern not in myth, but in the grim mathematics of a global black market. The camera pulls back from the Amazon to reveal the sprawling cityscape of Lima at night. Here, beneath the hum of traffic and the glow of digital billboards flashing headlines of disappearances, another kind of hunt takes place. A journalist, his face pale in the bluish light of a laptop screen, scrolls through an endless database of missing women and children, the numbers rising in a steep, silent scream. This is the other side of the story. While villagers in the jungle fought hovering phantoms, thousands of people were vanishing from the cities, their faces becoming posters on a wall, statistics in a report. The connection, once unthinkable, became terrifyingly clear. In a sterile forensic morgue, an investigator opens a steel drawer to reveal a victim of the trafficking trade, their body marked with the same precise, surgical cuts described by the jungle survivors. The Pishtaco legend, the tale of hunters who rendered human fat, was no longer a historical echo. It was a modern business model. The investigation revealed a horrifying hypothesis. A powerful criminal syndicate, or perhaps something even more organized, was using the ancient legend as the perfect cover for a vast, industrial-scale organ and human tissue trafficking operation. The black armor and energy weapons were not just for attack. They were theater, a terrifying piece of psychological warfare designed to make witnesses doubt their own sanity, ensuring that any report would be dismissed as superstition. But was it merely a criminal enterprise? The scale and sophistication of the technology suggested something more. On the edge of the Peruvian Amazon, satellite images revealed a secret, heavily fortified military base, its razor-wire perimeter and satellite dishes stark against the jungle. It was a ghost facility, appearing on no official maps. It was here that the investigation pivoted from crime to conspiracy. Inside a makeshift command tent, an investigator overlaid a timeline of the attacks with a declassified schedule of a recent joint U.S.-Peruvian military exercise codenamed Resolute Sentinel 2023. The correlation was perfect. The first attack occurred just 48 hours after the exercise began. The lulls in the assaults matched periods of troop rotation. The technology seen in the jungle was a perfect match for next-generation exosuits and directed energy weapons being tested in top-secret American defense projects. The terrifying possibility emerged. The attackers were not just using the Pishtaco legend as a cover. The attacks were the legend, deliberately brought to life. The film cuts to archival footage, a chilling history lesson in psychological warfare. We see declassified CIA documents from the 1950s, detailing how agents in the Philippines staged attacks by a creature from local folklore called the aswang, a type of vampire, to terrorize Hook rebels into abandoning their positions. We see another operation from the Vietnam War, Wandering Soul, where helicopters broadcasted eerie, ghost-like recordings of fabricated Buddhist prophecies over the jungle, preying on the beliefs of Viet Cong soldiers to drive them mad with fear. The pattern was undeniable. For decades, U.S. intelligence agencies have weaponized folklore, turning a culture's deepest fears into a tool of war. The attacks in Peru were not a myth. They were a live environment field test. The villagers were not just victims. They were unwitting subjects in a vast, cruel psychological experiment. This revelation broke onto the world stage in a firestorm of controversy. At a tense international press conference, officials in crisp suits stood at a podium, their faces composed, flatly denying any connection and dismissing the villagers' accounts as superstition. But the evidence, leaked by independent journalists and whistleblowers, was too compelling. The debate raged on television screens and across the internet, a clash between the lived, brutal horror of the survivors and the polished, implacable denial of the state. The final chapter of this investigation was no longer about a monster. It was about a machine, a global apparatus of power, secrecy, and technology so advanced it could make itself a myth, operating with impunity in the shadows, leaving behind scars, ghosts, and a truth that the world was now forced to confront. The debate raged in sterile television studios and classified briefing rooms, but the truth was not in a file. It was waiting in the jungle, in the scarred earth and the haunted eyes of the survivors. The official story had been set, a mixture of local superstition and isolated criminal activity. The world was given a comfortable explanation and encouraged to look away. But for a few, looking away was no longer an option. A final, unsanctioned expedition was mounted. A small, determined team of independent journalists, seasoned investigators, and courageous villagers who refused to let their story be erased. Their mission: to return to the heart of the terror and capture one thing that could cut through the web of denial and conspiracy. Clear, undeniable proof. We see them journeying upriver in a convoy of canoes, a fragile alliance of modern technology and ancient knowledge. Their faces are grim, their bodies tense with a mixture of fear and resolve. They set up a makeshift camp in a clearing near the site of the last attack, a place heavy with the memory of violence. The jungle presses in around them, a wall of suffocating green, its silence no longer peaceful, but predatory. As night falls, they deploy their arsenal of sensors, night vision cameras, and audio recorders, turning the small camp into a fragile fortress of light and data in an ocean of darkness. The first night is a war of nerves. Strange, rhythmic pulses appear on the frequency scanners. Thermal cameras capture fleeting heat signatures moving at impossible speeds just beyond the tree line. The jungle, which should be alive with the sounds of its nocturnal inhabitants, is deathly quiet, as if all of nature is holding its breath. The team waits, their hands gripping rifles and cameras, their faces slick with sweat in the humid air. The confrontation comes on the second night. A low, vibrational hum begins to fill the air, a sound that resonates deep in the chest. The motion sensors at the perimeter blink erratically. Through the eerie green glow of night vision goggles, they see them, tall, black-armored figures emerging from the mist, their yellow eyes blazing, their disc-shaped platforms hovering silently above the damp soil. The moment is a surreal collision of myth and reality, a legend stepping into the digital crosshairs of a camera. The climax is a chaotic, desperate ballet of light and shadow. The team's cameras roll as the villagers open fire, their bullets sparking uselessly against the invaders' armor. The armored figures respond not with overwhelming force, but with a terrifying precision. Beams of light slice through the camp, disabling equipment, scorching the earth, and forcing the team into a panicked retreat. The camera footage is a maelstrom of shaky, fragmented images, a glimpse of a glowing yellow eye, a flash of seamless black armor, the blinding burst of an energy weapon. It is a record of terror, a visceral, chaotic testament to the attack, but it is not the clean, perfect smoking gun the world would demand. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, the figures ascend into the night sky and vanish. The team is left in the smoldering ruins of their camp, their equipment damaged, their bodies bruised, but their evidence secured. They have survived. They have a recording. But as they review the fragmented, chaotic footage, a devastating realization dawns. They have captured the horror, but the mystery remains veiled. The images are too blurry, too chaotic, too impossible to ever be accepted as definitive proof by a world that prefers comfortable lies. The attackers, it seems, are masters not just of technology, but of ambiguity. The film does not end with a triumphant revelation, but with a series of haunting, unresolved questions. The team returns from the jungle not with a clear answer, but with a heavier burden. Their evidence, when presented, is dismissed by some as a hoax, embraced by others as gospel, and buried by the authorities under a mountain of official procedure. The truth, it turns out, is not enough. The final, powerful message is delivered by the narrator over a slow, sweeping shot of the vast, indifferent Amazonian canopy. Perhaps, in the end, it doesn't matter if we call them men, monsters, or machines. Perhaps the most terrifying truth is not what hides in the jungle, but the silence of the world that allows it to hunt. The silence of governments that trade lives for secrets, and the silence of a public that is too comfortable to listen to the screams of those who have been forgotten. The film closes on the face of a young survivor, her eyes holding a wisdom far beyond her years, a silent witness to a horror the world has chosen not to see.